Hello everyone, and welcome back to the late night, to what I hope is going to be a slightly more light-hearted video. We've had a couple of mostly talking head videos, and nice as my head is, I'm sure, I thought it would be nice to have some chess-focused videos and to have a little fun with it. So while I do intend to do some serious analysis on this channel, I think it would be fun to talk about what I was doing in those 25 years that I was away from over-the-board chess. So as I mentioned, I was playing just ridiculous amounts of bullet. So when I say bullet, I mostly mean 1+0. So 1 minute, no increment. And for most of the time, I was playing this on, well, it started off on the World Chess Network, which, you know, some people might remember from back in the day. And I think I might have played on playchess.com, but ultimately I ended up on Lichess and was playing on Lichess for years and years and years. I actually only joined chess.com fairly recently, and I have played bullet on chess.com as well, but Lichess was my main bullet stomping ground for many years. I experimented with hyperbullet, which is 30 seconds, and ultra bullet, which is 15. That's just pure degeneracy. You know, 1+0 is bad enough, but those are kind of just insanity. I played some hyperbullet tournaments and it was fun, but you know, 1+0 I think is about as fast as I can go while still playing something at least partially resembling chess. So, like I said, I want to do some serious analysis, some serious opening videos on this channel, but for fun, I thought first I would do a brain dump of some of the openings that I played and still play when I play bullet. I play less bullet than I used to, much less. But every now and then, you know, the little bullet demon in my head takes over, and I go for hours in the evening on chess.com. It is a bit of a sickness, you know. Probably anyone who's a proper bullet addict would admit that it's a bit of a sickness. You know, it does something for me. It's easy, right? It's quick. It's over quickly. You can do it in between work activities. You can do it for a few minutes here and there. It's just fun. It's a pastime. I don't know if it ever actually benefited my chess. You know, it probably kept my chess calculation ability alive to some extent. Certainly didn't make me a better player. But I've had lots of fun with it. I think I've only ever heard of one book written on the subject of bullet chess, and that's by, you know, probably the king of bullet chess, which is Hikaru Nakamura. And I actually have that. I have that downloaded somewhere, but I'm not going to go into it in this video because otherwise it's going to be very long. I want to try and keep this intro short. I don't know if we need to say, you know, why do we play bullet chess? You know, if you're not interested in it, then this video is definitely not for you. But if you do enjoy bullet and you want to pick up a few new opening tricks, then, you know, you might be interested. So why would one need a bullet repertoire as opposed to a normal repertoire? Well, what I found is that openings that work very well for me in over-the-board chess and slower time controls didn't work so well in bullet, mainly because in a lot of my proper openings, I need to think. First of all, people know the theory quite well. But also, if thought is required to play the right moves in your opening, then it's not going to be very well suited for like extremely fast bullet chess. So I've generally found that slow positional openings are right out for me. What does tend to work is, if you want to think about it, bullet is about exploitation of human weakness under time pressure. So your ideal is going to be to play forcing moves early on. You want your opponent to start thinking as early as possible. You want to make unexpected moves. That's the other thing that makes people think. So if you have an opening repertoire that you know very well, that has early forcing unexpected moves, I think that's probably the ideal. A lot of the time, after sort of 8 or 10 moves, I might be 10 or 15 seconds up at the clock. And that's worth quite a lot. In bullet, the way I like to think about it is that material and time are interchangeable. So you could work out your own system of values here. I think that in bullet chess, a pawn is probably worth about 5 seconds. So, if you have an unexpected gambit of a pawn and it gains you 5 seconds on the clock in the opening, then it's already worth it. It doesn't even matter if you get an initiative on the board or not. You've already gotten enough, And you could probably scale that up, maybe a piece, a knight or a bishop is probably worth 15 seconds. Maybe a rook is worth 25, maybe even 30 seconds. Queen sacrifice is probably worth 40 seconds. So, I mean, if you took my queen off the board and gave me a minute and you took 20 seconds for the entire game yourself, I'm pretty sure I would flag you. And therefore, I think it's fairly reasonable to say that, queen is worth about 40 seconds. I mean, you could argue about the exact values here, but I'm trying to just get across that in bullet, part of what's going on is just a very practical consideration about time. This is not real chess, okay? So if you're a chess purist and you want to hear sound and sensible chess advice, that's not what's going on here. We're talking about, like I said, exploiting human weakness under extreme time pressure. So, without further ado, I'm going to start looking at my terrible, horrible, fun, exploitative bullet repertoire. So all of these are openings that have served me very well over the years. Some of them I've made up myself, and some of them are well-known and perfectly sound openings. And I guess I'd make the point that I don't only play this repertoire. I often play perfectly normal openings in bullet, but these openings feature heavily in my practice. I'm just going to bring up, there we go. So these are just some very rough principles I've put together about bullet chess. It's not real chess. Do what works. Play forcing unexpected moves in the opening. Material and time are interchangeable. And, bullet is supposed to be fun. If you're not having fun, there's no point in doing this. It brings absolutely no benefit to the rest of your chess, and probably no benefit to your life either. It's just supposed to be fun. So, you can experiment, you can do crazy things, play crazy gambits, have fun with it. Okay, so the first opening that I would like to look at is, there isn't really a name for it. It's more of a system or a setup than an opening, but I've given it a name anyway. So I'm going to call it the Bullet Knight. The Bullet Knight system starts off as white with the move 1b3. You can also play this system as black but I'm just going to show you the basic setup as white. So if they play g6 here, you can't play the bullet knight setup, okay? It's a whole different opening, and we're going to look at it a bit later. But the basic setup here, if black just plays some normal queen pawn opening moves or ready moves or Nimzo Larsen moves, this is our basic setup, right? We're going to put bishop on b2, queen on c2, knight on f3. The other knight can go to c3 and the bishop goes to e2. But, you know, as early as possible, that's the bullet knight. You're going to put your knight on g5. And you have absolutely no intention of retreating this thing. You know, that thing is going to stay where it is. Now, there's many possible replies here as black. So we're just going to look at some of the most typical. Obviously, if they ignore this and play bishop e7, then we are just going to chop that knight on f6, and we have just one apiece at minimum because we're threatening mate. So in this position, they'd be forced to play g6. We play bishop takes e7, and we've won a piece, okay? Now, that's going to happen more often than you might think because of the amount of pre-moving that happens in bullet. So that's the first benefit of the bullet knight system, is you will win a lot of very quick, very easy games where people simply immediately drop a piece because they don't know what you're up to. You're playing apparently a slow positional system, and then all of a sudden some tactics happen. Another move that you may see played quite often here is they'll just go h6. Let's just kick the knight. This is the most natural possible move. And we're going to play h4. And by the way, this sacrifice is perfectly sound. The engine still gives this position very rough equality, maybe a slight edge to black. Best move here for black is rook e8. And we're just going to take, knight c3. And the whole idea of this is whenever they take the knight, you just take back with the h-pawn. So takes, and you're already winning here. White is actually winning in this position. That knight can't move. If the knight moves, then we are going to have queen h7 check, followed by queen h8 mate. Nice and easy. So what is going to happen is, next move, we are going to end up taking this knight, and we are going to have a continuing attack that is going to be pretty much undefendable. And this is another thing to remember about bullet, is whenever possible you want to be attacking. Now, maybe for some people that might be true, okay, but me personally, calculation for attack is much quicker than calculation for defense. I find it very hard to be defensively accurate with no time on the clock. So that's another reason why this is a good system. So we go back to the position after knight g5. Another very natural reply. I'm going to consider it our main reply is just to play knight d7, because in that case they can answer bishop takes f6 with knight takes f6, and they're still defending h7. So this is fine. We're just going to develop, going to bring out some more pieces, and we have some threats now. So h6, h4 will usually get chucked in there at some point. And now, if you will observe, white has a threat here. So we are threatening to take on d5. Black recaptures. And then knight takes d5 is coming, because black cannot recapture because of this mate threat. So bishop b7, defending d5. No problem. We're just going to bring out some more pieces. we're just going to leave the knight there. That guy is never coming home. He is much more likely to get sacrificed on e6 or f7 than he is to retreat to f3. So that's one thing you've got to remember for this system. You've got to commit. That bullet knight is going to get fired into the black position somehow. Yeah, this is, I would say, by far the most common move you'll see in this kind of position, because there's a very sensible motivation behind it, which is black wants to play d4. So one of the things that black can do to safeguard his position is shut down the diagonal of that dark squared bishop. But in this position, it happens to be a mistake. You play bishop f3. And white is already better here. Now, there are a few different replies here. So one thing we should observe is that if black plays knight e5, we have this very nice reply, knight takes d5, followed by e takes, bishop takes e5, and we're doing really well here. If black simply develops a piece, we now follow through with our other main threat that we observed before. We're going to take on d5, takes, and now we got knight takes. And although it looks like we've only won a pawn, in fact, we are winning here according to the engine. This is plus 2.6. Basically because after bishop takes, there's almost nothing black can do in this position. Almost none of his pieces can move. And he can't even defend with something like g6, because queen takes g6, king h8, queen h7, mate. So these are the kind of tactics that come up in this system. And what is so great about this is you can play it against all kinds of setups by black, you know? So if black starts off with b6, he starts off with c5, he starts off with e6, we can just play the same moves. And we can also play it as black against quite a lot of queen pawn openings. So this system is, I would say, quite annoying to play against. Right, the next opening we're going to look at is called, well, I have called it again, the needle attack. And there's no theory on this that I'm aware of, so this is something that I worked out myself, just from trial and error. So I mentioned previously that here they can play g6, and this kind of makes the whole bullet knight system ineffective. There's no point playing that system where you put the queen on c2 and the knight on g5, because with g6 there's no mate threat on h7. So we got to do something different here. And there's plenty of things you can do, but in my quest for early forcing unexpected moves, I eventually hit on this move here, e4. Obviously, black cannot take because the rook drops. So that's the first thing. Now, they can take some of the fun out of this position straight away by playing d6. This is probably one of the best replies. I've played lots of different things in this position. The engine thinks that the best reply is knight to c3, and you'll just get some sort of normal position. I have often played this. The engine hates it. So we get bishop g7, and we just shove the pawn to e5. And unlike in the main line that we're going to look at in a bit, the inclusion of d6 and f4 frees black's position up a little. So we get some moves like this, bishop e2, or we can play knight c3. You can just play this position. Knight c3, queen e2, castles queenside is a perfectly viable plan. But after e4, by far the most common reply, I would say 95% of the games that I play, they just play bishop g7 straight away, because why not, you know? Perfectly good reply, and they're not suspecting anything untoward. So we're going to play e5, knight d5, which is the only good move. And again, the engine is going to tell you here that the best move for white is d4. And I'm sure d4 is absolutely fine, but that's not what we're going to do. So we are going to play something more forcing. We're going to play queen f3. And this is a key position in the needle attack. There are 4 replies for black here, which we can look at in turn. This is probably the most solid reply. It takes out most of our tactics, but it does give us quite a promising attacking position. This is very sound, c6, keeping the knight in the center. That takes the bite out of some of our tactics as well. The best move according to the engine is knight b4. I would say this is almost never played. I've probably encountered this maybe 1 in 100 games. Basically because people never look at this. So why would you remember an engine move? It looks risky, you know, to put the knight way out there. People would rather play solidly when they encounter something they don't know. It's perfectly fine for white, so we'll just go knight a3 to defend c2. And then we just get some moves like this. So castles, h4. We're almost always going to be pushing the h-pawn at some point in this opening. h5, knight c6, castles queenside. And basically we're going to let one of these pawns go. They can take this pawn with check if they want to. And in fact, after we capture here, whether they recapture with the h-pawn or the f-pawn, the engine already prefers white. In fact, after the h-pawn recapture, the engine thinks we're practically winning here. You know, one plan, it's very simple, it's just queen g3, queen h4. So much better to recapture with the f-pawn. We're still going to go with queen g3. And white just has a very nice attacking position here. The loss of material doesn't really matter. Likewise, if they don't capture the a-pawn here, if they simply take the e-pawn, which looks a bit more natural, we're just going to go queen g3, a5, bishop e2. Again, we're not worried at all about that a-pawn. If they want to give up 2 tempi to capture that pawn, we're just going to let them, because our attack on the king side is very fast. We're going to come in with f4. We're going to capture here. This knight at some point may go here and here. And I've won quite a few games from this position. It's very tactical and messy, but for the cost of 1 or 2 pawns, white has a great position here. Knight b6 can probably be thought of as the main move here. And this is where we see the basic idea of the needle attack. Now, I'm going to note something, right? And I'm going to confess something here. I've never played anything other than what I'm calling the main line here, which is e6, because this is the entire thematic idea of the needle attack. However, the engine says that white gets a clear advantage here by simply playing a4, chasing the knight, a5, and then queen g3. Really simple, you know, very natural attacking position. That knight's going to come to f3, probably going to play, might even play f4 first, followed by knight f3. Bishop is going to come out somewhere to be determined, possibly e2, possibly c4 if that knight ever leaves. And white just has a very natural attacking position here. So next time I play this opening, I may actually try this, but it's not what I want to look at right now, because my original idea was this e6 move. So this is why I'm calling it the needle, because that e-pawn just runs all the way up the board and causes problems. So what you'll observe is that we have a double threat. We have a threat of mate on f7, and we have a threat to capture the bishop. And I just can't tell you the number of times that opponents fall for one of these two threats in this position. Now remember, we're talking about 1+0 time control, and you don't have a lot of time for thinking. So much of the time, they will just capture the pawn, and we'll just snag that bishop on g7, and they're completely lost. And quite a lot of the time, they are going to capture our bishop on b2, and we're going to play queen takes f7, checkmate. Okay? It's a practical bullet weapon. Now, if they don't do any of those things, we've still got a nice position. So we'll just take as the main line here, castles kingside. They can also play f6 here. And in this case, we're perfectly happy to just give up that e-pawn. We're not going to pay any attention to it. They're going to need a couple of tempi, both to capture it and then to get their own pawn out of the way so they can develop. So 2 tempi is worth quite a lot. So after f6, we just play h4, captures, h5, knight c6, takes, rook takes, bishop takes, queen h3. And again, all of these moves are forcing, right? We're not under any threat. We're playing forcing attacking moves, and we're forcing them to react and to calculate. And this looks really dangerous. Okay, we're already winning a pawn here. We can stop our analysis here. Yes, black possibly may be able to improve a little bit further back, but we've played all the most natural moves, and we've got a clear advantage here. So going back, the main move here I would consider to be castles kingside. Protects both threats and puts their king in safety, or, you know, relative safety. So there's only one move here we have to take. King takes. And again, I'm going to note a divergence here. I've only ever played one move here, which is h4. The engine says that we have to take here. Rook takes, queen g3. This is what the engine wants us to play, and it thinks it's about equal. So I'll just play out a few moves. We get this h5 move in, and now there's only actually one good move for black here, which is to play this absolutely incredible move that nobody is ever going to play over the board against you. But let's go back, because like I said, I've never actually captured this pawn, because my attitude towards this opening is simply attack, attack, don't waste any time, and don't worry about material. So I have only ever played h4 here. And again, there's a funny divergence here. So 95% of the time, they're going to capture here because it's completely natural move. They're opening up an attack on our queen, and they're recapturing our pawn. So it looks like obviously the best move. But in fact, what really matters here is that they're weakening their king. So after f takes, we just go queen c3 check. They retreat their king. Apparently, according to the engine, it is better for them to block. Right? But this looks extremely dangerous to me because we're just going to play g4. But the engine doesn't mind about that. It's just going to play knight d5, and it says this is the best continuation for black. What I can tell you is that after this queen check, almost everyone is just going to put their king back here. And then after h5, we don't need to do much more analysis here. The engine says it's about plus 1.4, and it's very obvious that we have a huge attack. Black is only going to have one pawn covering their king, and typical series of moves might be knight here, queen here, queen e8, and now almost everything is good for white. We're not going to take on g6 straight away. We're just going to bring out some pieces, so we can go knight f3. We even have ideas of bringing the rook out here. We're going to play knight c3, going to castle queenside, and long term, black is just has a losing position on the king side. So that is after knight b6. We have some similar variations after c6. So if he keeps his knight in the center, this is slightly improved. We're still going to play our needle move. And we are going to have another divergence here. So one thing you'll see played very often here is knight f6. And then capture, king takes, and again, this move h4. So we just keeping on attacking the shelter of the black king. Rook f8, h5, takes, and now knight c3, and white is better here. Black king is long-term unsafe, and we are going to have ideas of playing this knight up here with check. So that's if they played their knight back to f6 here. I would say it's much more common for people to castle, and again we play capture the bishop, king takes. Here you want to capture the pawn. So in this position, it's a lot more of a mistake to play h4, and that's because once they recapture here, we do not have this queen check, so we lose a tempo with our queen, which ends up being very important. So in fact, in this position, we want to capture on f7, rook takes, queen g3, d6, h4, h5. And again, you know, even though we have only developed our queen and moved pawns, we actually have a huge attacking position here. We've broken up the black king shelter. The engine isn't going to mind defending this. In fact, I'll show you again. The engine says the best move here is g5, which is almost unimaginable for a human to play. You know, much more likely that they play something like this, which is perfectly fine. We will just play our knight here, castle queenside, and we're just going to rely on the long-term unsafe position of black's king. So finally, we'll go back to this one. This is probably the most solid reply. And I don't know what percentage of the time I meet it, but it's quite frequent. And playing the queen to g3 immediately is the best move. And the following sequence of moves is very typical. So d6. Now, the engine wants us to play this. I have very often played d4 in this position. So you will get a sequence of moves like this. This is a slight advantage to black. So I suppose that is why the engine prefers to play the knight out. So we get knight c6. Now we play d4. Castles h4. I would say the way these positions normally go for me, I'm just going to play some moves here, okay? None of this is analyzed. This is just typical stuff I get in my games. So they take here. They will usually play a5 to get something going on the queen side. Best move here is probably a3, according to the engine. But I often just go all in. So h5, a4. I will often do something like this. Now, here, this is a mistake. Takes. Now, if they take back with a h-pawn, we are going to have all kinds of threats. Queen h3 is going to be a big threat. So they're much better advised to take back the f-pawn. Depending on how they clarify the situation over here, we may castle queenside, or we might just leave our king in the center. If we go back a bit, sometimes you find that they just develop. So I will usually end up castling queenside, and these positions should be very nice and intuitive to play for an attacking player. We've got all kinds of threats here. So I'm going to stop there. As you can see, it's not comprehensive analysis, but it should give you a flavor of the positions you get, which are really kind of theoretically unknown. And if you're familiar with them, and if you've played a lot of bullet games in them, you can just win a lot of games practically without thinking. So that's the needle. Next one I'd like to look at, I'm going to preface by saying this opening is terrible. Don't play it. Okay, so this one is called the Vulture. And it is actually, although I'm saying it's terrible, there is actually a book on the Vulture by international master Stefan Bucher, which was probably written in the 1980s. I read it in the 1990s. It was already out of print. And you know, Stefan Bucher is one of these quirky players like Michael Basman, famous English international master, who they have their own way of thinking about openings. And Stefan Bucher came up with his own variant of the Benoni, the Vulture. So the entire idea of this opening is that Stefan Bucher didn't like the fact that if he was planning on fianchettoing his bishop on g7, that this knight would be in the way. So he decided that actually in this position, the ideal square for a knight would be d6, where it would attack the e4 and c4 squares. It would support a b5 pawn break, and possibly in the future might also support an f5 pawn break. So that's the idea behind the Vulture, is that this knight is actually ultimately going to end up back here, which is great in theory. In practice, the knight spends 2 tempi to get to d6, where it will often be a target of an e5 pawn push, and by blocking the d-pawn in, it prevents the development of all of black's queenside pieces. Now, there's compensation for this, and I've found the Vulture to be a really effective bullet and blitz weapon. I have also played it a couple of times over the board. So I played the Vulture once when I was, what age was I? I'm not sure, but I played it against an 1800 in Ireland, And I also played it against a 2100 when I was also 2100. And I drew both of those games. And I lost in a 4 NCL game where I played it. So it's playable, especially if white doesn't know it. It's very playable. If white knows it or works out one of the most accurate lines over the board, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. But as a bullet weapon, it's very effective. So let's stop waffling and let's look at one of the main ideas of the Vulture. So the most natural move and one of the most common moves that you'll encounter is F3, because what the hell is that knight doing there? Okay, let's kick it. We're going to be able to play E4 next move. Why would you not play F3? And here we see one of the main ideas of the Vulture. So rather than retreating the knight straight away, queen comes in with a check. So we're trying to introduce a little bit of disharmony into white's position. Knight d2 is the main move here. You will quite often encounter the move bishop d2. If they do that, chop, 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 g6, and black is better. Okay, black is going to have an extremely powerful dark squared bishop. White has dark squared weaknesses. It's not lost or anything. The engine thinks white's position is fine here. In practical terms, I would say black is better here. It's just an excellent Benoni type endgame. So we're not worried about that. After knight d2, the knight parks itself on its desired square. White plays e4, which is by far the most natural move. He can play other moves here. Believe it or not, the second engine move is to play king to f2. I just think that's something you're never ever going to see. Everyone plays e4. So we go g6 and again a divergence here. So in Stefan Booker's publication on the Vulture and in my practice, the only move you encounter here is bishop d3. So we'll go into that in a minute. But the engine says the best move here is e5. And it looks harmless because it looks like you're simply driving the knight to a pretty good square where it can get to an even better square, and that the e-pawn may now end up being a bit overextended. And this was Stefan Booker's entire idea in his book, is that he wants to draw that pawn forward so he can attack it. But the engine says, actually, for concrete tactical reasons, black is doing pretty badly here. So bishop d3, d6 is the best move here. Putting the knight on d4 is actually kind of premature. White simply forces its exchange. He's going to have a massive development lead and a massive center. So this does nothing for us. So d6 is the move. And now if white captures here, we don't recapture with the pawn, we recapture with the knight, and apparently this is now equal. So in contrast to the previous position, this knight, the Vulture knight, is now in its ideal situation where it supports these future pawn pushes, it influences the center, and it is now unassailable. It cannot be pushed around by any white pawn. And black is going to have excellent play on the dark squares. However, white does not do this. White unexpectedly captures the bishop. Captures the knight. So bishop takes, pawn takes, pawn takes. And now here is the engine line that is, if you're looking for a refutation of one of the lines of the Vulture, here it is. g4 practically forces bishop c8. Bishop d7 is Also not great because you're going to be closing in your knight. So bishop c8. And now the absolutely key move. So this is an idea that white players must know here. And the whole idea is to get this bishop to this square before black can get his bishop. So basically white is chucking a pawn to be the first to this diagonal. Whoever was the first to that diagonal was going to dominate this position. So queen takes b4, rook b1, queen a5, bishop b2, rook g8, knight h3, and the engine says this is +2, a bit more than +2. So white is winning here. Even though he is down a pawn, his position here is completely overwhelming. Black is busted. So there you go. We're looking at one of the worst lines first. Now, what I have to say is that nobody has ever played this against me in 25 years of experimenting with the Vulture in online bullet chess. I've never seen this. But there you go. If you're white and you encounter the Vulture, now you know what to do. So let's go back and look at bishop d3. Now this is what I think is the main move, the most natural move, and the one you will encounter most of the time. And this allows you to demonstrate one of the main ideas of the Vulture. So we got bishop g7, knight e2, and now we hit them with the move b5. So this is the move that justifies the position of the knight on d6. And what you encounter most often here, they simply castle. We'll look at in a minute what happens if they take it. So castles, we're just going to exchange off on the c4 square, exchange bishops, takes, and again, this is one of these positions where the engine says it's about equal, and I think it's already advantage black. If you're a Benoni player or a Benko Gambit player or a King's Indian player, the long-term chances in this type of position are always with black. You have that incredibly powerful long diagonal, pressure on the b2 pawn, and you dominate the dark squares. You're ultimately going to put a rook on the b file. So nobody should be complaining about getting this type of position. So that's if they castle. The other move they can do here is capture the pawn, and then we play c4, bishop c2, and now this is another interesting engine discovery. So in this position, I always used to play knight takes b5, castles, and c3. And generally we would get to this position. So capture, queen takes, bishop a6. This is perfectly fine for black. But the engine points out that after c3, knight c4, again, black is practically busted here. Queen, where does the queen go? Queen a6, bishop d3. So again, the computer is emphasizing white's lead in development and not worrying about capturing more material, but he's chasing the queen around. This is +2 for white. And for that reason, taking on b5 with the knight is bad, and we should take with the queen. And after we do this, we're perfectly fine. So play a few more moves out. Knight c3, queen b6, queen e2, castles. And black is fine here. Black is slightly better, because although these pawns are temporarily very strong looking, they don't have a lot of support, and they are going to end up weaknesses. They're going to end up undermined. We're going to play d6. We have our bishop coming to b7. So black is doing pretty well here. So going back to our key vulture position, we're going to look at something a bit better for white. Okay, we just looked at f3, which is the most common move you're going to encounter. Queen c2 is much better. So this is a very similar idea in that the idea is to challenge the knight and support the e4 pawn push, but it's better than f3 because it doesn't weaken the dark squares so much. So we do the same idea, queen a5 check, and again there's a branching point here. Knight d2 is what you're going to encounter a lot of the time, but if somebody knows the line, this is definitely the best move. Knight takes, bishop d2. So this is the whole idea. That bishop is going to get on the long diagonal, and this takes away one of black's main ideas. So what we really have to do here, you've got to play e5. We're going to close the position up. We get to this kind of position. This is playable, by the way. I have had this a few times in bullet games, and you will normally get in f5 at some point. The engine prefers white here by quite a bit, so it's about +1. But in my experience, these positions are not lost. There's plenty of play here. That is if they play the best move, knight c3. Like I said, this is the most common move. And then we follow the same idea. We put our vulture knight back on d6. e4, g6. Now, e5, weirdly enough, is actually not so good here as it was in the line with f3. And that is because after we play knight f5, if we follow this kind of sequence here, with the queen on c2, this trade is no longer a good idea for white. So with the queen on c2, we don't have that concrete forcing line involving g4 pushing the bishop back. e5 is still totally playable here, but it's not the main move. So let's play some moves out. This is very often what you'll get. Now, there's a couple of different ways to play this position. We can just castle here. I prefer to play this straight away. So basically, if both sides act like everything is normal, if white castles, black castles, at some point this is coming and it's going to be absolutely crushing. Okay? So we are going to try to deal with that in a radical way. If white captures, we're very happy, okay? We recapture with the d pawn, and all of a sudden, wow, we have development, we have freedom, we have everything we could want. We're totally happy. And if this pawn ever comes forward, the knight is going to go that way. Excuse me, I'm starting to lose my voice here. So after e5, white should never capture. This is the kind of sequence you'll almost always see. I've had this position many times. And the engine, which has no positional preconceptions whatsoever, says that the best move in this position is g4 to completely prevent the f5 pawn push. This is the kind of move that, again, you're just never ever going to see from a human. Probably not in classical chess, and certainly not in bullet chess. So much more likely you see simple developing moves. You play f5, takes, knight takes, and here we are. This is the kind of position you'll get to in the Vulture. The engine thinks it's very good for white. I would say in my experience these positions are very complicated. They're not at all straightforward. I would say it's just as easy, if not easier, to play black here. That knight is obviously going to land in there at some point. Going to play d6, develop the queenside pieces. This is a completely playable position. And if you're lucky and your opponent hasn't seen the Vulture before, you're probably about 20 seconds up on the clock at this point. Okay, next, number 4, the O'Sullivan Gambit. And I would put this one in the same category as the Vulture, in the sense that, according to the engine, it's absolutely god-awful and borderline losing. While in practice, it's absolutely amazing. And I can prove it. So let's look at the first few moves. So this happens in the Alekhine. And by the way, the Alekhine defense has a special place in bullet chess because, along with, I guess, the Scandinavian, it's probably the most forcing reply to 1e4. So the problem with the Scandinavian is that although black is forcing matters, you know, if we recapture with the queen, now white is forcing matters, okay? The Alekhine forces a response immediately. And in my experience, there's going to be a large percentage of games where you simply win the e-pawn straight away. So many people just pre-move e4, knight f3, because knight f3 is going to be their main move against Sicilian, e4, e5, Perk. So a lot of bullet players will just pre-move knight f3 and you just capture that straight away. And if you're very lucky, you will meet the following sequence of moves. So anytime I see somebody pre-move the first 3 moves, so if I get pre-moved e4, knight f3, d4, I'm taking on f2 here, because half the time they will also have pre-moved bishop d3, and you just get their queen. I cannot tell you how much I've had this position on the board, right? And I've had people get really angry about it and say, this is not real chess, what are you doing? And I'm like, you pre-moved 4 moves in the opening, you know, what do you expect? This is ridiculous. Like, the time you save by pre-moving in the opening can't be worth what you're losing. So even if they stop pre-moving at this point and capture the knight, you've got 2 pawns for the piece. And, you know, I play on here with these kinds of moves. And, you know, in bullet, it's playable. I mean, objectively, it's losing, right? But it's more than worth it for the 50% of times that you win their queen here. And you can have a look in the Lichess database and see exactly how many times this position has arisen. And you're going to find it's a few thousand. So that's one to remember. Anyway, normal Alekhine, d4, and now obviously the main move here. Oops. Let me get rid of my arrows. Right, I've screwed my arrows up and I don't know how to fix it, but the main move here is d6. But we are going to play the O'Sullivan Gambit, which is b5. And the O'Sullivan Gambit has the distinction of being the highest scoring move in this position in the Lichess database. So you won't find any master games whatsoever with this move. Nobody plays it because it's objectively losing. But in the Lichess database, after the move b5, the statistics are white wins 41% and black wins 56%. It's the highest scoring reply. So there you go. That's just a little bit of trivia for you. Half those games are probably me, since I've been playing this on Lichess for absolutely ages, at least a decade. A little bit of history, by the way. The reason it's called the O'Sullivan Gambit, I discovered this gambit sometime in the early 1990s when I was reading the Irish Chess Journal. And I've tried to find a back issue of the Irish Chess Journal containing the article I read, just so I could be sure that I didn't hallucinate it. And I can't find it. So if anybody has any back issues of the Irish Chess Journal, I'd be very, very interested to find the source article, which details the O'Sullivan Gambit. I have no idea who wrote it. But that article went into the basic ideas and gave it the name. Again, I have no idea where the name comes from, the O'Sullivan Gambit. But I picked it up at this point, and I've been playing it ever since. So the basic idea is they capture the pawn. We immediately play the move c5, and there's a big branching point here. But first of all, before we look at any of the best moves for white in this position, we're just going to show you the basic idea. So if they capture that c-pawn, queen a5 check, and black is losing at least a piece here. So, if they reply bishop d2, for example, we're just going to pick up that bishop on b5. If they reply knight c3, it's even worse. We're gaining at least a piece here. Slightly trickier players will play this move, queen d2, with the intention that if we take the bishop, they play queen takes. And now we have this move. Again, countless games I've had in this position. I just couldn't tell you how many. I mean, it has to be over 100. It's so common for players to just walk into this position. So the best sequence for white here is to play knight c3, when, although we can capture here, it's not as accurate because white is going to get a little bit of material back. The best move is just to go queen a6, they retreat the queen, and we're going to win the rook in the corner. Any other move is the same deal. So if they go queen here, we're just going to capture, bishop takes g2, and we're winning. So that's the basic idea. That's if they capture the c-pawn. They can also blunder with knight here. Although I say blunder, this is actually not quite so bad. They can keep the piece here. So queen a5 check, and they can play knight here, queen takes, and then they can get the piece back with c4. So queen back takes, and black is more than okay here. This is at least equal. Black has two bishops, and the white center is disintegrating. The only thing that white has going for him is he has a bit of a lead in development. So in the computer's eyes, this is close to equality, but black is a little better. So let's look at what white should do. So first of all, in this position, c4 is an excellent reply. And this is black's basic idea again. So in this position, capturing the knight again is a mistake for the same reason. We pick up the bishop on b5. And again, although we have something like material equality here, I would say black has a big advantage. The only move for white not to be much worse here is to immediately force the exchange of queens. Protect this pawn, force the queen exchange, and then black is going to pick up this key pawn and is going to be better. White will probably get the d pawn, but these pawns are horribly vulnerable, so black has an advantage here. So basically that is why white should not capture the knight in this position. This is probably the most natural move. And then knight b4, which again, in bullet chess, every single threat you have in bullet chess is significant. So although, you know, it might seem like nothing to say that, oh, we threatened to fork the queen, etc. The more forcing moves you have, the more calculation is required for your opponent, the better. So this is the kind of position you'll get. White has won a pawn and consolidated the center. So a little bit of a disaster here. They've navigated their way through the tactical complexities of the O'Sullivan Gambit, and they've got a nice advantage in the center. However, you can still fight in these positions. Your bishop is going to get on this lovely long diagonal. You're going to somehow develop, you have a choice of bringing your bishop out this way, which in order to do that, you would need to first play a5, so that needs a lot of time. The other way to play the bishop is to bring it out to g7. In my experience, if black gets to consolidate and then undermine the center with d6, he can often get enough play on the long diagonal to compensate for the pawn. If white is very accurate, he's going to keep his pawn advantage. But one thing you've got to remember when it comes to gambits in bullet chess is it's very rare for a game to be won by the advantage of one pawn in the endgame. You know, a pawn is almost insignificant. And like I say, if you manage to gain 5 seconds on the clock in bullet chess, that's worth a pawn. So for that reason, the O'Sullivan Gambit is one of the most effective bullet weapons that I've ever used. And I still play it, even though there's more than one refutation. Even when you encounter the refutations, you can still play on. So if we go back to the basic position, probably the most common move is bishop c4. So this is, if someone realizes about the queen a5 threat, this is going to be the most common reaction. Attacking the knight and moving the bishop out of danger. So you could probably call this the main line. And in this position, actually, protecting the knight with bishop b7 is best. Now, I have always played pawn takes here. But this can get black into trouble. So the idea of taking with the pawn is that if white captures the bishop, we are going to pick it up on d5. But black has to be very careful here. So white plays knight c3, which is the only move not to be worse. And if black makes the mistake of capturing this knight, so this looks amazing. And actually, I have played this many, many times and won countless games after bishop takes a8. The position is now absolutely won for black. And I've won loads of games this way. However, capturing that knight on c3 is a gigantic blunder because of this move. Now, this is a move that almost nobody is going to see unless they already know it. If somebody works this out over the board without knowing it, then they're an excellent player. b4. And all of a sudden, black is completely dead. You have absolutely nothing. Have to capture the pawn, and then you just lose the rook in the corner. This is now nearly +5 for white, and you're lost. So in fact, after knight c3, although you really want to capture that knight, in fact, in order to not be dead, you have to play knight c6. And the idea here is that if white captures the knight, this is actually a mistake, because now you can capture here, because b4 is no longer possible, because you can capture the e-pawn with check. So you're refuting the refutation. So after knight c6, white should play bishop d2. We're forced to recapture the knight now to restore some, well, close to material equality. And you get to this position. And again, you're not completely dead here. The engine gives it +2. So it basically says white practically has a winning advantage. Again, I would say, in my experience, you can play on in these positions. Your idea is your bishop is going to come to b7, you're going to play e6, this bishop is going to come out somewhere. You're only a pawn down, so if you manage to consolidate, you can fight on here. But yeah, this is one of the worst case scenarios for black. So that's it. I think that's enough to show about the O'Sullivan Gambit. As you can see, I'm being very honest here. I'm not trying to sugarcoat these openings. I'm trying to say what makes them so effective and some of the traps and tricks. And I'm also showing you what to watch out for and what white should play. So in that spirit, we're going to look at probably another, another one of the worst openings that you can possibly find, which is called, it actually does have a name. It's called the Herrstrom Gambit. And it's a reply to the Reti. And the reason it's effective, I think, is because people who play the Reti in Bullet are really looking to play their first several moves without thinking. So, they're either going to play some sort of generic queen pawn opening, or possibly, more often they're going to play these first 4 moves. They're going to play knight f3, g3, bishop g2, castles kingside. And in fact, some players pre-move those first 4 moves. So again, this is Bullet. We want to exploit our opponent's tendencies and habits. Boom! Yeah, now there are certain crazy players who might try this in over-the-board chess. I don't know if I believe anyone's ever tried it in classical chess, but I imagine it's been played in Rapid and Blitz. And the idea is simple. Well, the first idea is even simpler. So against players who pre-move the first 4 moves that I was talking about, you get a free knight. And in fact, if they pre-move castles, you're going to get a free bishop as well. And yes, this happens quite a lot. So that's your best case scenario. However, obviously, most players are going to take it. And then we play e5. And there's a few different moves they can play here. We will first look at the most common move, which is simply to retreat the knight. So we push our pawn, obviously. And it looks like some kind of reverse Alekhine. And according to the engine, the best move is d5 here. but I don't see why you would want to play an Alekhine a pawn down. Okay, that seems pointless to me. So I prefer to play this move because it's a bit trappier. By far the most common move in this position is d3, challenging the center immediately. If they don't do that, if they play, you know, some other move, sometimes they might play this, you are just going to establish your big center, and you know, you've definitely got compensation for the pawn in that case. So this is by far the most common move. And now the engine says that we should play an Alekhine style, that we should play c5 and d5. But I always play this because there's a very nice trap associated with it. So bishop c5, and I'm just going to show you this, and then I'll show you why it's no good. So knight b3, bishop takes f2, king takes, knight g4 check, king g1, queen f6. Now threatening mate on f2, so they have to play queen e1, and now we go here. And how many times? You know, let's say dozens. I mean, I want to say over 100 times, but let's just say dozens of times I have encountered the move h3, queen f2 check, queen takes f2, and we get this very nice checkmate. Anyway, obviously in this position, white is not forced to play h3. The only move not to be, well, they can sack their piece back. Okay, knight takes, and white is fine there. But the actual refutation is to play g3. So this deals with the mate threat. It looks dangerous, and in fact, in practical terms, black can still fight on here because it's a bullet game. We don't want to go after the material because in this position, white has a lead in development, 2 pieces for the rook, and well, 2 pieces and a pawn for the rook, and he's completely winning here. So there's no point trying to re-establish some kind of material equality with knight f2. The best try for black here, if he's unlucky enough to reach this position, is just rook g8 and try to get developed. So get some moves like this, castle queenside. Now the engine is going to say this is completely losing for black because we're a piece down. In my experience, you're not going to always lose this in bullet. Lots of pieces remain on the board. We do have a half-open g-file pointing towards white's king. It's very possible for white to make mistakes here, so you can fight on. Generally, in bullet, you know, if I have the chance of getting the attractive checkmate, and if it happens quite often, I take the risk of ending up in a position like this. And if I do end up in this type of position, I'll just play it. You know, we don't give up. We'll fight our best, and you will often manage to save or win a position like this. So going back after e5, the best move here for white is d4. And we're just going to kick the knight. After they've played d4, usually once they understand the idea of protecting the knight and leaving it on g5 for a while, they're going to keep it there for another move with h4, h6. Now they bring it back and we play e4. Now, knight g1 is the best move. In my experience, that's the most commonly played move. And this is very powerful. So obviously they can't do this because now they're getting mated. So they have to play their knight back. Pawn takes f2, king takes d5. And again, the engine says white is more than fine here, okay? The engine says white is, you know, somewhere between slight advantage and clear advantage. I would take this position as black anytime in a bullet game because white's king is not safe. And, you know, like I said, defending is so much harder than attacking in bullet, you know? The attacking moves in this position are just going to come so naturally. This knight is obviously going to go in one of these directions. This bishop is going to come here. We're going to have very natural developing moves. We have this half-open g-file. An engine, of course, is going to play an absolutely accurate sequence of defensive moves for white. But in bullet chess, I think black wins a position like this, like 4 times out of 5. So that is why knight g1 really has to be played here. And then we play knight f6. You can't really go after this pawn. So if we play bishop takes f4, it's just not worth it. This position here, yes, we've regained a pawn, but we've given white a lead in development, a free attack on the e-pawn. He's gained tempi on us, and he's practically winning here. So it's plus 2.6. So going after pawns is not why we play an opening like this. So let's just zip through a typical sequence of developing moves in this position. Okay, so we end up here. It's +1, which is nothing more or less than a statement of the fact that white has an extra pawn, which, since we gave it to him on move 1, we shouldn't really be too concerned about. Usually you'll be well up on the clock at this point. And this is not an easy position to play for white. Yes, he has an extra pawn, but again, we are going to get play on the missing pawn file. Pressure on g2. We're going to castle queenside. And, you know, white has a solid position in the center, but there's all kinds of little tricks. You know, there's this kind of idea as well. So again, in bullet chess, at the cost of 1 pawn, this is not a bad position to get. Right, so I've shown you several dubious openings in a row, and we're now going to look at something that is much sounder. So the Grand Prix attack is a fully sound system for white against the Sicilian, and I played it for many years in over-the-board classical chess, and I only stopped recently because, you know, once you get to about 2000, 2100 type level, you don't get the easy attacking wins anymore. Black players know what to do against it, and really the best you can hope for as white is, you know, some attacking chances in an equal or slightly better for black position. So I don't think it's viable at this level, and I've been learning some different things. But in blitz and bullet chess, it's more than viable. And the benefit is that white's moves are, it's a system, you know? So white's moves are easy and systematic, and black is the one who has to be accurate in defense and has to know what he's doing. You know, white has a plan. If black plays normal moves, white has, you know, almost an automatic attacking plan for about the first 10 to 15 moves. So it's excellent for bullet. And it's a reply to the Sicilian. So that's the Grand Prix attack. But you can also play it against the modern, like this, or the perk. So the only difference is that, you know, now the engine actually says their best move here is to transpose into a Grand Prix attack proper. But the main difference with the modern move order is that they can play this c6 move and try to harass the bishop in the center with d5. But it's actually nothing much to worry about. So we can just go like this. And this position is actually clear advantage for white. Although we're going to get our center undermined somewhat with c5, this is compensated for, more than compensated for, by the fact that this bishop on g7 is now basically buried. And yeah, this is a very good position for white. One of the main problems actually is that the immediate c5 is not really possible because of the attack on this pawn. And if they don't play an immediate c5, so let's say they play this to protect the pawn, well, we've got a couple of options here. You have the positional approach, so you can go a la French defense and just create your big center. But the engine points out an even stronger continuation, which is just to chuck Harry up the board immediately. And it turns out that this is a massive attacking position. So yeah, so the Grand Prix attack move order is viable against the perk and the modern as well, which makes it very useful in bullet. It reduces the number of openings you need to know. So let's have a look at the basic moves. So there are other moves here. So there is a system where they play e6. It's nothing really to worry about. So we just do this kind of thing. I mean, this is equal, but it's very unclear. And I would rather play white here. Black has weaknesses, and black is also not going to be able to castle normally. Again, the engine thinks it's equal, but I don't. Obviously, the engine, where there's a disagreement between a human and an engine, the engine is correct. But basically, I would say that this is easier for white to play. And I'm going to stick to what I think. So by far the most common reply, rather than e6 in this position, is g6. So the first few moves for white are pretty automatic. Now, I always play the bishop c4 system. There is a whole system for white, which is possibly the main line of the Grand Prix attack, involving bishop g5. So the idea is similar to Rossolima type idea we want to capture here. This is a fairly typical sequence. Black is slightly better here. And the main reason I don't like this for white is that it's just different to the normal Grand Prix attack position. Even if the engine thinks this is a little better for white than the bishop c4 line, this is not what we want in our attacking system. So in this position, I always go bishop c4. So e6 is the move here. E6 and knight e7 is black's plan. Now, in the book that I read on the Grand Prix attack, the main move here was this sharp advance f5, immediately challenging black in the center and the king side and looking to sacrifice a pawn. And this is justified if black takes and we go d3. So if black continues to eat pawns and just develops, this is where we see some of the main Grand Prix attack ideas. Now, black is still okay here if he plays one very accurate move. So he has to know the move d5, after which we have equality. If he doesn't know the move d5 here, he's basically just losing. So we have multiple threats here. We have the threat of bishop g5. We have a threat of bishop h6 followed by knight g5, which is almost automatically winning. Bishop g5 is the stronger threat. So let's say if black plays to simply eliminate this knight, and then goes here. In this position, the engine suggests that the strongest move is actually queen takes bishop, because anything else is completely losing. So rook e8, knight d5, you'll often get this kind of position. These are absolutely crushing threats, and black is completely lost here. Now, in practice, this is what almost everyone will play, because it's the main line. So we take, and there are two completely viable options for black here. You've got f takes e6 and d takes e6. F takes e6 is a little more aggressive in the center, but weakens the king position a little. D takes e6 is probably the main line. And we just get to this kind of position. And again, you know, the plans are fairly simple here. If black allows us, we'll play the normal Grand Prix attack, Death Star, you know, inevitable mate. But you'll never really get that if black knows what they're doing, because they're going to plonk their knight on d4. So much more common is that white will develop bishop to e3, queen to d2. We'll play bishop h6 to try and eliminate black's strong bishop. And then there are some attacking ideas that you can pursue after that. For example, at the moment, this knight on here doesn't have any prospects, but I've very often had games where this knight takes a little trip. d1, let's get rid of some of these arrows. d1, e3. So this is after the dark squared bishops have been exchanged. This knight will often take this route and help with targeting the weakened kingside dark squares. So the other move is f takes e6, and again similar, we develop, they will play d5, we retreat. Now, according to the engine, black should play h6 in this position. b5 always used to be the main line, but in engine times, this has all been worked out, and it's been determined that white just takes this pawn and has no problems. So queen b6, c4, support the knight. White has an extra pawn, although he's got some temporary problems to deal with. This bishop is very bad. This knight is kind of out of play here, but black doesn't have enough compensation for the pawn here. But in fact, this f5 move immediately is not regarded as accurate anymore. So castles is the main line here now, and we just get to this position. So black is always going to play d5 here. We play our queen e1 move, which is just the absolutely standard attacking move in these types of positions. If they ever play d4 closing the center, this is almost never a good idea. We'll get these kinds of moves. You know, that's just an example of what can go horribly wrong for black here. Black should normally keep tension in the center and put his knight there. And then you can get a sequence like this. E5 is an important move here to limit the scope of the black bishop. And yeah, this is just equal. So there you go. That's the Grand Prix attack. Obviously, you know, the Grand Prix attack is not a topic that we can cover quickly in a video like this. And if you are interested in playing it as a system, you should probably get a book on it or a Chessable course, because there's lots of ideas for both sides, and it's a very interesting opening. But yeah, I've covered some of the typical positions that you'll get in Bullet. And like I say, the main benefit is it's a very easy automatic attacking setup for white. And black is the one who has to play accurately. So next we're going to look at what I play against the French. Now again, in Over the Board Chess, I've changed the systems that I play against the French now. But for many, many years, the only thing I played was the Milner-Barry Gambit. And it's still very effective in Bullet. So we'll go through the first few moves. So in the advanced French, whether they play Bishop d7 first or Queen b6, it doesn't matter, because we're just going to sack the pawn in exactly the same way. So, by the way, I have found that in online Bullet, so it's most accurate for black here to capture on d4 first, but it's very, very much more common than it is over the board. It's very common online for people to play both Bishop d7 and Queen b6 straight away without exchanging the pawns. And this is a very well known mistake. So white should capture and castle. And now there's a little trap that you should know. So the most natural developing move for black here is knight e7. And then after b4, black is lost. This bishop is trapped. And white wins a piece. So normally black should prevent that by playing a5. And now we have a way of getting quite a nice free attacking setup. So we go knight d2. So what we're threatening here is just to bring the knight to b3 and c5. So very often black players will try to prevent that by playing a4, which makes sense. Now we play b4, a takes, knight takes, and black has a choice here. So if he retreats his bishop, it's clear advantage white, because this bishop now interferes with development. So really, he has to play here. And now we have a very nice version of an attacking setup, which Gawain Jones covers in his Coffee House Repertoire book, and he calls the Hector variation. And normally, to get to the Hector variation, white has sacrificed a pawn. But in this case, what you'll notice is black is missing his a pawn. So material is actually equal here. And white has a very nice free attacking setup. So white's ideas in this position are going to be h4, h5, the rook to b1. This knight is going to come to d4, and in some cases we may have pawn to c4. So this is a very pleasant attacking position for white. So this is what to do if they don't capture the pawn on d4 straight away. If they play Queen b6 and Bishop d7, you take on c5. This has been known for, I don't know, at least 100 years, going back to Nimzovich. So yeah, they take the pawn. That's what they need to do. Queen b6, and we're just gonna, the Milner-Barry Gambit involves sacrificing this pawn on d4. So we castle, takes. Now in the main line Milner-Barry Gambit, knight c3 is the move, allowing black to capture on e5. So we're not going to do that. The line that I play involves a double pawn sacrifice. So we play queen e2. So we're temporarily protecting this pawn, but we're allowing black the chance to come this way and try to pile up on it and win it. And at the right moment, we're going to give it up for a strong attack. So knight e7, knight c3, knight c6. So the pawn on e5 is now lost, and we are going to get the maximum that we can in terms of gain of time for it. So bishop e3, queen takes e5, f4. They have two choices here. They can retreat their queen either of these directions. In Online Bullet, you'll often, by the way, see queen c7 or queen b8, which are mistakes. So if they play queen c7, then knight d5 wins our pawn back, or wins one of our pawn back, and gives us a very nice position because that wins the queen, since queen e5 is not possible. Likewise, queen b8 runs into the same thing, so we're not gaining a tempo on the queen on c7, but it doesn't matter. We've won one pawn back, and although black will be able to get developed, castling here is actually a very significant blunder, because the engine will immediately point out a mate in 7 here with this, and we probably don't even need to. I'll play it out on the board just so you can see it, but it should be obvious that this is a winning attack. So queen h5 check, g8. Now we have this little move here, queen g4 check, and now we have rook h3, inevitable checkmate coming. So queen d6 is what you'll see most often here. And we play rook d1, bishop e7, and now the move is f5. And they have a few different moves they can play here. I'll show you what happens if they castle. So castling is probably what you will encounter a lot of the time here, since it looks like they're not in any immediate danger. But after castling, they're toast. So f6, bishop takes, rook takes, pawn takes, bishop takes on h7, king takes, queen h5 check, and now you have to be a little bit accurate here. So they have to go back to g8. If they go back to g7, it's easy because we're going to play bishop h6 check, and it's going to be made in a few moves. If they go to g8, you have to be accurate, because if you go bishop h6 here, this is actually a blunder. Knight e7 saves them in this position. So we've given up a lot of material. We have no interest in capturing the rook on f8, but now we don't have mate because of the knight coming into g6. So you just have to be accurate here. There's two ways to win. You can play knight e4 immediately, but the easiest is to go queen g4 check, king h8, queen h4 check. Now, the reason you're doing this is so that you're now looking at the f6 pawn, king g8, and now knight e4. So this is now completely winning. They can't allow you to take here because it's going to be mate. So they have to capture. And now although material is sort of nominally equal in that they have a rook, a knight, and a couple of pawns for the queen, in fact, because of their king position, this is absolutely one for white. It's +7. So that's what happens if, after f5 in this position, they castle. There's another very nice sacrificing line here. So another very natural reaction for black is to play e5 here. And then we have another line. Now, the thing about this line is I have actually had it on the board with the identical checkmate in 2 over-the-board classical games, one of which you can actually find online because it happened in an international tournament many, many years ago. So it goes like this: bishop c4, forces d4, knight e4, queen c7, bishop takes f7 check. And now, in order not to lose, they have to go here when white is just much better. My opponents all capture the bishop. And then you have this forced sequence. So obviously they can't play g6 here because f takes g6 is double check and they're going to get mated very quickly. So they go back to g8 and now f6. This is all completely forced. Bishop e8. There's a few different moves they can try here to avoid mate, but it all ends up with the same thing in the end. Queen check, queen g7. Now we have this nice move, bishop h6. They can't capture the queen because of rook f8 mate, and therefore they are lost. They're losing the queen, but in fact it's inevitable mate anyway. So you have this sequence: bishop g6, rook f1. Now again, queen takes h6 is impossible because of queen e6 check, mating. So all they can do is just waste a few moves. So a5 check, takes, and I don't think we need to look any further. We're mating here. So that is what happens after the move e5. Now, the best move is what I encountered in the last time I ever played this variation in over-the-board classical chess. And I was playing a FIDE master called Michel Kekelidze, who either had seen it before or worked this out over the board. And it's the best move, queen e5. And black is clearly better here. All of a sudden, white does not have enough compensation for the 2 pawns that he's given up. The queen is absolutely fantastic on this square. And now, in fact, black even threatens to take over the initiative. So the threat is to just go bishop d6 and start attacking. And black is also threatening to just capture another pawn. So a typical sequence here: castles. White tries to keep the attack going. Black captures, takes, 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 queen e6, and then knight takes d5. Now, although white has regained a pawn here, his attack is gone, basically. Without the light squared bishop, there's no attack, and his pieces are now kind of all hanging and a bit all over the place, and that is why black has a clear advantage here. Now, if somebody gets to this position in a bullet game, fair enough, okay? We will just try and play it, and we'll try and survive, I don't know if anybody has ever managed to get to this position in a bullet game with me, and I've won countless bullet games using the sacrificial lines that we just looked at. So again, you know, it's all a trade-off, and this opening is, in my opinion, fantastic for bullet. Okay, next is a fun one that I don't always play. So this is like not an every time, even in bullet, this is not an every time opening. It's a once in a while thing, and it's the Halloween Gambit. So it's in the 4 knights, and white sacrifices a full piece on move 4. And it's a lot of fun, and there's lots of traps and tricks here, but obviously, objectively, this is losing. So this is the idea. And there's one very clearly best move for black here, which is knight g6. We're going to look at that at the end. We'll look at the fun stuff first. So if black plays knight c6, then we get to put in place one of the main ideas. And already in this position, although white is a piece down, he has almost full compensation. So this is the most common sequence you will get. And here there's a divergence. So if they play knight g8, trying to keep the material, we play d6. Now, weirdly enough, the engine doesn't like this move. The engine wants us to play queen e2. And this is a very interesting way to play it, right? I've actually learned something when I was analyzing the opening here. Now, I have always played d6, and the idea of this is pawn takes. We are threatening to win our piece back. So black will play queen f6, queen e2 check. And now, again, in the past, I've usually played bishop e3 and just played this position. But this is objectively losing for white. What the engine actually says you should do here after queen e6 is play knight b5. And even though the queens are off the board, the engine thinks that we have quite a lot of compensation here. So what it's saying, this is minus 0.9, which means that although we're a piece down, we have quite a lot of compensation here. We are threatening to pick the a7 pawn up. Black can't play a6 because of the weakness of these squares. He has to play b6. We have a big lead in development, and we have a strong outpost on d6, and we have a strong attack. So that's the way I always played this position, playing d6. That's the classic idea of the Halloween Gambit, is to basically ram this pawn all the way up into black's position. But, like I said, looking at this position with the engine, it immediately told me that, in fact, this move is even better, and it's good enough for almost full equality. And the idea is that instead of shoving the d pawn up, we're actually going to shove the f pawn up. And so if we put a couple of moves on the board, bishop c5, f5, this massive central pawn phalanx is worth a full piece. That's what the engine is saying. In fact, the engine says that by far the best move for black here is to give the piece back straight away. And this is the way to maintain equality if he tries to keep the piece. So if he plays knight f8, this position is completely winning for white. So this is well worth trying in bullet games. Now that is if Excuse me. Long video, lots of talking. That's if black tries to keep his piece. What I've found is that a lot of the time, once we get to this position, black players decide that they want to return the material. So you'll often get bishop b4 here, takes, and then there's a few different moves you can play here, but you're usually going to have to give up this pawn here. And this is playable. Although we're down material and we have a bit of a funny king, black has trouble developing his queenside. And, you know, we've got ideas of rook lift. We've got pushing the h-pawn ideas. So this is more than playable. Okay, so another way for them to try and return the material is by playing bishop b4 in this position. And that is fine. So we capture it. Takes. Queen d4. And there's some interesting sequences here. This is no good because of taking here. So bishop takes, pawn takes, queen e7, and now bishop e3, castles, bishop d3, and this is, I mean, the engine says it's about equal. I would think that white has a practical advantage here because of the two bishops and open b file. He's got a nice free position. However, you can't ignore the fact that there are these two double pawns. So I guess equality is probably a fair assessment. Another reply that you'll encounter quite often here, which is not a great move, is knight e7. So this allows us to implement the Halloween Gambit idea in pure form. So we go e5, knight g8 is a big mistake here because then this move is now crushing. Knight f5 is now the only good move for black here. After which the intention is to return the piece by playing knight takes d6. If they don't play knight f5, so if they play something like knight g6 here, then knight b5 is a killer. Pawn takes, and we have two threats. We have knight c7 check and we have queen e2 check. And you can verify for yourself with an engine if you want that black is losing here and there's no way to defend both threats. So again, this is something that you will quite often get in bullet. So going back, this is the best line for black, is to play knight g6 right away. Basically, it doesn't allow white to gain the tempo that he wants by playing d5. So we still get a bit of initiative for our piece. So we go e5, knight retreats, bishop c4. We're just trying to have very crude threats here. We've got threats of the queen coming to f3. There are a couple of moves that are decent for black here. And in fact, c6 is a very decent move. But the main move here is d5, returning the pawn to, well, returning one pawn to get developed. So we will take it, because now at least we have two pawns for the piece. c6, and now there's a little bit of a divergence here. The main move is bishop b3, and that's the best move, and we will get bishop e6, we'll get this kind of sequence. And yeah, white is down a piece. He has 2 pawns, he has some compensation, and you just have to play this position. Going back a little bit, in the times when I've managed to get here, I've usually tried bishop e4. And my main idea here is I'm going to castle queenside or kingside quickly, and I'm going to try and ram through f4, f5. So the main idea of bishop e4 is to keep control of f5. So we will often get this kind of sequence: bishop b4, castles, knight e7, and now quite important that you play queen d3, keep control of the f5 square, and they castle, and you play f4. Now, I have found this position quite dangerous for black. If they play carelessly, for example, if they, what would you play for black here? Let's say they play something like this. You're just going to play f5, f6. That's the whole plan. In fact, if you go f5 here, the engine says that the best move for black is to give the piece up and target the d4. Again, in bullet, when encountering this position for the first time, working out tactical details like this is extremely difficult. So what normally happens to black players when they encounter a move like f5 is they say, oh my goodness, I have to save my knight. And they play something insane like knight h8. And now this position is basically winning. So we're threatening the knight on e7. We're also just happen to be threatening the maiden one on h7. So we're going to run through this one. This is the Halloween Gambit. Although it's objectively dubious and possibly even losing, it is full of tactical opportunities and traps, and really great for bullet. Really quickly, so the number 9 is what I'm calling the Hedgehog Fischer attack. So this is not something you can get all the time, but hedgehog positions are quite common, and the Fischer plan involves a very sharp g5, g4 pawn advance. Or if you're playing a hedgehog setup as white, which Fischer was in the source game, I can't remember who against, might have been Reshevsky, might have been Larson. It's the g4, g5 pawn push. So I'm going to run through this one fairly quickly, mainly because it's not really possible for me to go into proper hedgehog theory in this video. But this is the kind of sequence that a hedgehog arises from. So basically, it often comes out of the English opening or Sicilian. Sicilian can often end up, or Taimanov can end up in these hedgehog type positions. White has these 2 pawns on e4 and c4, and black sets up all of his defenses on the 6th rank. So that's what defines the hedgehog. So we'll just play a few more moves, and we've now got to, one of the starting positions of the hedgehog. Now there's all kinds of move orders in theory, so again, I'm not going to get into it, but all I want to show is the basic Fischer plan in the hedgehog, because what I found is that in bullet chess, this is a very dangerous attacking plan and very difficult for white players to deal with. So that's the starting move. King h8, rook d1, and this is the whole idea. This pawn is going to be our battering ram, and we're going to create big attacking chances on the king side. So white is almost always going to play on the queen side. White's plan usually involves these pawns advancing. Now, I have sometimes offered this as a pawn sacrifice with the idea that they take, and then we get to very quickly double our rooks on the g file, which looks very dangerous. Now, when you're an engine, you just retreat your bishop and you say black has nothing here. In practice, these types of positions are really difficult to deal with, and you can get very good chances against even really strong players in blitz and bullet. But since we want to give at least partially good advice, I'm not going to recommend that you immediately sack the g-pawn in this way. So we should prepare it with h6 so that we get to play it without it being a pawn sacrifice. So this is a typical sequence. We're going to double our rooks on the g file. We're going to let white get his initiative on the queen side. And we're going to play g4. And again, all the time the engine is going to be screaming at you that black has absolutely nothing here. But this is an extremely dangerous position. So let's say white just plays a move that looks generally safe. You're just going to take on f3, knight e5, and this is actually now completely winning for black. The threats are simply to overwhelm white in the center and the king side. So if we look at some of the engine suggestions, right, queen e2, knight h5, knight b3, notice that black is just calmly building up. The control of the g file simply allows him to build up a big attack. Rook takes a6, bishop g5. See, we're just calmly and quietly infiltrating. So I guess we have to take it as read that this is a winning attack for black. And that's just one little mistake. The engine actually says that the best plan for white here is to keep the g file closed. So sacrifice a pawn, play f4, trade that dangerous bishop off, and according to the engine, white has a clear advantage here, +1. According to me, this looks like a very dangerous position still for white to try and defend. So that's why I think these are very practical options for black. I think this is a great opening for bullet. Also because in these kinds of, Maroczy bind type hedgehog setups, it can be very unpleasant for white players who are preparing for a positional grind and squeezing you on the queen side to suddenly have to deal with crazy tactical patterns appearing on the king side. Okay, and we're getting to our final opening, so well done for bearing with the video this far if you've made it. And the final opening is quite specific. You don't encounter it very often, but you will notice, especially in bullet, that a lot of players like to play the Stonewall for both colors. So a certain type of player likes to take the work out of preparing an opening repertoire, likes to take the thinking out of the first few moves for both colors. And one of the ways you can do that is by playing the Stonewall setup. So what this looks like is these players will essentially try to ignore everything that you're doing, and they will play the following moves. They'll play d4, e3, c3, f4. So they'll set up the Stonewall pawn formation. They'll put their knight on f3. They'll put their bishop on d3. They will castle. They may or may not put their queen on e2 or e1. This knight is going to come to d2, and then they're going to play knight e5 or something. And they will sometimes pre-move these moves. And I used to find it quite annoying because it is a very solid setup, and you can do it for black as well. So black can do the exact same thing You know, you can do the entire Stonewall setup, and you can almost play all these moves without worrying about what your opponent is doing. So, you know, I just developed a little system for cutting across this and getting attacking prospects against the Stonewall setup. So it starts off pretty normal. And this is the move. So basically, they've now done all of their standard developing moves, and pretty soon they're going to try and play e4, e5, or they're going to put their knight on e5, you know, and they're going to try and get going their play in the center. So before they do that, and before they stabilize, we are going to try and get some attacking chances on the king side. So we got h6. Let's say they play queen e2. Often these types of moves would be automatic. Sometimes they'll play queen e1 in this situation. What we do the same, whatever they do. So we are playing h6, g5. That's the whole idea. We're basically using their f4 pawn hook to open up both files on the king side. And funnily enough, it is actually a massive blunder for them to take this pawn in this position, which is crazy to think about. The right move here is knight e5, which we'll look at in a moment. But let's look at what happens if they take the pawn, which they almost always do. So pawn takes. Now obviously, although I've won many bullet games with them taking here, you can't expect to be this lucky. But if you are, great. Takes, queen h4 check, king g1, there. And you've won a piece, nice and easy. So they have to play h3 here. And then, again, nice and easy. We just, there's there again. They can't take here. Knight takes g4. This is a winning position for black. The engine suggests we try to defend with knight e4, f5, and basically there's not going to be any defense for black here. I'm not even going to spend any time analyzing this. This is completely winning. We haven't even given up any material here, really. So yeah, they can't take that pawn. They got to play knight g5, and then we're just going to develop. Boom. And this is completely losing. We pick up that piece and we have a completely winning position. So that's the power of this h6 g5 idea, is that really it's almost always a mistake for them to take it. Like an outright blunder. So after you play g5, now it's not like white is losing it. In fact, white is doing very well here, but he's got to play this move. Knight e5. It's really the only move. And we take. There's a couple moves he can do. Knight takes is the most straightforward. We play bishop takes. And now, the key move. Now he can play rook takes f4, and this is all right. You know, rook takes f4, knight d5, rook f2. But in this case, we're going to get to play our main idea. We're going to castle queenside. We're going to play bishop to e7. We're going to put our rook on the g file, and we're going to have a nice attack, especially effective in bullet chess. So rather than playing rook takes f4 in this position, the really star move for white is to play e4. Just leave this pawn alone and establish a very strong center. And this makes life a little difficult for black, so we can still put a rook on g8, c4, takes. And now we have to be careful. So if we try to go for our normal attack here, that's going to be a killer. So we kind of have to bail out here. So the engine points out a sequence that keeps black from being in a losing position. So takes, knight takes, queen takes, d5. Key move. Only move for white. Bishop takes f4. Queen takes c4. Queen e3. And here we are. So black is actually a pawn up here, but he's very far behind on development, and he's never going to be able to castle because of this. So for that reason, white has an advantage here. The engine puts it somewhere between plus 0.7 and plus 1. So again, this is worst case scenario for black. This is if white manages to play through this entire tactical sequence accurately. And if he doesn't, and if he does what 95% of Stonewall players do and just takes the pawn, he's going to be lost. And the thing about Stonewall players is they don't really want to think in the opening, and that's why this system is so effective. It cuts across their automatic setup, and most players who play this setup will take that g-pawn without thinking, because basically they think this is nonsense, you know? It looks like black shouldn't be able to play like this, and I think it's quite unintuitive for them to think that taking that free pawn is actually not just a mistake but a blunder, leading to a losing position. So that's why, you know, it's got to the point that I'm usually overjoyed to see a Stonewall on the board, because for the, you know, against the type of player that plays the Stonewall, this system is extremely effective. You know, the very accurate sequence of moves that we looked at involving knight e5 and leading to this difficult position for black, I've never had this on the board after playing this anti-Stonewall system for, I'm just going to pick a number, I'm going to say 10 years, could be 15 years, I really don't know, you know. It's just it's a very practical, highly effective bullet system. And that is it. That is end of whatever this was. So, you know, I don't know what you call this. It's a repertoire or a bag of tricks, or you know, really it's kind of me brain dumping a lot of highly effective practical weapons that I've worked out myself over the board. Well, not over the board, but over the virtual board, you know, over many years of playing bullet. You know, credentials are kind of meaningless, but this repertoire I have found to be effective all the way up to 2700 bullet rating level on Lichess and chess.com. So that doesn't mean that playing this repertoire will get you to 2700. Obviously, you have to be a good bullet player. But what it does mean is that the openings that we've gone through here, although they're dubious and although they're full of tricks, they are highly effective up to, you know, pretty, like 2700 bullet is a pretty significantly high level. You know, players above that level, 28, 2900, 3000, will probably work their way through these complications. And unless you are also that kind of high level, you know, it's not really going to matter what opening you play. But, you know, these are fun ways to try and get the drop on your opponent, essentially, and exploit the natural problems of trying to play chess in an environment of such limited time, which is that you certainly don't want to be calculating right from the beginning. You certainly don't want to be in sharp tactical openings that you don't know. You certainly don't want to be on the defensive. And this repertoire is about putting people in all of those positions and absolutely annoying them as much as possible. So there we go. I'm going to call the end of the video here. I hope this was some use to somebody. I'm going to return to more serious chess content in the next videos. Now I feel like I've purged my bullet demon and I've contributed some knowledge back into the pool, and yeah, have fun with it. Hopefully I see some of these opening ideas popping up a bit more in Online Bullet. So don't forget to like and subscribe, and see you next time.